Welcome to Bitcoin at $125,000 per coin. Let's talk about what you need to know for the next 3 months in the land of Bitcoin. All right, first off, some historical perspective. Historically, back in 2013, 2017, and 2021, there would be a peak of Bitcoin in the October-November timeframe, the year following a presidential election. That would be, of course, October of this year or November next month of this year. The difference was what caused that peak was a massive price rise leading up to October and November. And you would get what's called a blow-off top. A blow-off top is when you get this huge unsustainable rally driven by speculative demand. And then ultimately the speculative demand is not sustainable. And so you get this basically huge spike up, and then the price comes significantly back down and then marches higher from there. Now, the thing that is different about 2025 is we have not had a blow-off top. The price has been grinding sideways and then up, sideways and then up, sideways and then up. And everybody's bored to death, even though Bitcoin's up 600% in the last 3 years. People are just bored out of their minds because they're used to a Bitcoin that's just all over the place all the time, making people's, dopamine receptors respond constantly to huge upsides and, epic downsides and all that. And this cycle, we have not had that. It has been sideways grind and then a big jump up. Sideways grind, a big jump up. Sideways grind and a big jump up. And typically, that sideways grind gives the market an opportunity to digest the big upward swing. So you have not had on this cycle, you have not had these huge price corrections because the market instead, the demand has been so strong that instead of a big price correction, you essentially just grind sideways. When demand goes soft for a period of time, rather than a price correction, you end up having this sideways grind that wears people out and scares people out. So the only two big dips so far this year have been, or not this year, but in the last 2 years, there was a dip in 2024 of about 33%, and then another dip in 2025 earlier this year in April of about 33%. So two corrections of between 30% and 33%, one in August of 2024, which was related to international, I forget what international incident happened, but then in April, what's called the tariff tantrum, when everybody threw a fit and started selling everything because they were afraid the tariffs were going to basically screw up the whole economy. So anyway, other than those two 33% price corrections, it's been a pretty modest, uninteresting ride up of 600% gains over the last 3 years. So what's going to happen over the next 3 months? Well, let me paint the scenarios. A low probability scenario is we enter a bear market from here. A bear market means a significant, 30, 40, 50% drawdown in the price. I think that's very unlikely because we have spent so much time grinding sideways and so much time generally between 100,000 and 125,000 that it does not feel like the market needs a correction because, again, the market has had a lot of time to digest the current price ranges. So it feels like that's a low probability outcome. Of course, it is likely in the next year or two, we will get a price correction of at least 20 or 30%. And you may be thinking, well, I'll just wait and buy it on a price correction. The problem is, it is, likely that the price increase that happens before the correction will result in a price that, if you have a 20% correction, for example, will result in a price being higher than it is now. So, for example, if the price runs up to $200,000 and you have a 20% price correction, that means the price drops to $160,000. Well, if you're waiting at $125,000 for a price correction and you get a price correction down to $160,000, well, guess what? You're screwed because you're paying a lot more for your Bitcoin in that price correction than you could be paying right now. Plus, that assumes you'll actually buy it in that price correction, which you probably won't because you'll freak out because the price will be dropping. Also, you don't know when the price correction will happen and you don't know how big it will be, which means the likelihood is that you will wait for a 30% correction, but it'll only correct 25%. And then you'll miss it. The price will march higher and you'll be stuck reaccumulating Bitcoin you could have had today at 125,000 at 180,000 or something like that. This stuff happens all the time, and it's been happening for 17 years now in the life of Bitcoin. So the advice, of course, is the same that I always give, which is buy as much Bitcoin as you can, hold on to it for as long as conceivably possible. Don't try to time the market. Don't wait for dips and all of that. Okay, so low probability scenario, we go through a bear market. Medium probability that there's at least a 20 or 30% price correction somewhere along the way, probably to a price that's higher than the price today, and therefore it does not make sense to wait. Now, the most likely scenario, in my opinion, which I would give, maybe bear market is, sub 10% probability, medium term, 20 or 30% price correction, I would say is, a 20% probability, which leaves, let's call it a 60+% probability that what we're going to get is a big parabolic rise from here. And so why do we get big parabolic rises? Well, first of all, they're called parabolic because they look like a parabola, meaning they just basically, the price takes off. Typically what happens is when an asset goes up long enough, everybody starts deciding that the asset will keep going up for a long time, and you start getting demand from unexpected places. So for example, if Switzerland all of a sudden decides that they're going to buy some Bitcoin for their balance sheet, that would trigger a series of dominoes where a bunch of smaller countries would likely start buying Bitcoin. Or if a major corporation like Facebook, Mark Zuckerberg's two goats are called Max and Bitcoin, like Bitcoin Max. So, Mark Zuckerberg might decide to put some Bitcoin on the Facebook balance sheet. But who knows? I don't know what the catalyst is. I think it was JP Morgan this week, defined or coined the term, I guess it was last week, the debasement trade. The debasement trade is, hey, what are you going to do in a world where the fiat currencies are being debased by governments? And their definition of the debasement trade is people buying gold and Bitcoin. Gold is not very practical for individuals to own. Central banks have obviously massive vaults and security teams, and, they can send warships across the ocean to get, gold and all that sort of stuff. But gold is not very practical for the individual, and Bitcoin has superior monetary properties on virtually every vector to gold. So as a result of that, I believe, and many believe, Bitcoin will ultimately win out in the end and surpass gold. But currently gold, the value of all the gold that humans own in the world is more than 10 times the value of all the Bitcoin that exists in the world or ever will. So Bitcoin needs to increase in value by a factor of more than 10 just to catch up to the current price of gold. And the price of both gold and Bitcoin is likely to continue to go up in the near term because central banks are buying gold and individuals are buying Bitcoin and companies, etc. So I think we're likely to have a parabolic rise in the price of Bitcoin coming soon. And the question is, what should you do about that? Well, one, you should buy as much Bitcoin as you can before that happens. Because once you get a parabolic rise, it becomes very tempting to do crazy stuff to get more Bitcoin. But what ends up happening is you end up buying near a top, and then there's a price correction and then you feel like an idiot. Now, the best way to not feel like an idiot is to watch my videos, because I'll keep you in the loop. But typically, I watch James Check. So James Check has a newsletter called Check on Chain. And the primary goal of his newsletter is to educate people on what is happening in the world of Bitcoin and what is about to happen in the world of Bitcoin. And in that newsletter, he covers all of the different metrics that tell you, are we in a major price parabolic rise of the price of Bitcoin, and how likely are we to go through a major price correction? So I posted earlier a couple of the screenshots that he uses for that purpose from his website. And one is the topping cloud, where he tracks numerous indicators that historically have indicated when the market is getting like super overheated. And currently 0 of them are flagging. And then he's got the hodler's dashboard, which tracks 4 different metrics and tells you if they're neutral or cool or heated or overheated or whatever. And right now, none of those are flagging. In fact, we had an all-time high, and literally there was like no chatter. This is like the quietest all-time high ever. So what I recommend is buy as much Bitcoin as you can before that parabolic rise. That way you can enjoy the parabolic rise. because A, you own a bunch of Bitcoin that's going way up with the rest of everybody's Bitcoin, and B, you don't have to worry about, is the price going to go through a 20 or 30+% correction after the parabolic rise? You don't have to care because you already own your Bitcoin. So if it doesn't go through a correction, great. Your Bitcoin's worth more. If it does go through a correction, your Bitcoin is worth slightly less than more, but still way more than now. So it is just way better to buy Bitcoin before a huge parabolic rise. But I know what's going to happen. Bitcoin's going to start a huge parabolic rise, and everybody's going to be asking me, okay, Joel, I'm finally convinced. Bitcoin's at 150,000, 160,000, 170,000, whatever it is. And suddenly everybody is convinced that they now are a Bitcoin true believer and it's time to start accumulating Bitcoin. Of course, there's never a bad time to buy Bitcoin, but $125,000 is a way better time to buy Bitcoin than $175,000. But I promise you at $175,000, everyone's going to be coming out of the woodwork wanting to buy Bitcoin at that level. And again, I'm going to have to painfully tell them that all the indicators that from James Check are saying, hey, it's getting a little steamy in here. That doesn't mean it's a bad time to buy Bitcoin, but it might mean you got to live through a dip. So your $175,000 Bitcoin's going to dip down to, $140,000 Bitcoin, and you're going to not like it. And it's just a lot easier to avoid that if you buy the Bitcoin early, and then you don't have to worry about whether it's dipping or not, because it's dipping to prices that are above the price you paid. So who cares? So that is the world we live in. What you need to do for the next 3 to 6 months, I would say, 1, acquire as much Bitcoin as you possibly can now versus later. 2, just understand that we may go through a parabolic rise and that you ought to keep track of my videos, which are going to be closely tracking James Check and his Check on Chain newsletter to keep you in the loop on how overheated or not overheated everything is, which hopefully will keep you from buying the top, which in the long run, you'll be glad you did, but in the short run, you'll be annoyed because your Bitcoin will be underwater. And it's no fun having your Bitcoin underwater, even if it's very temporarily. So keep an eye on that. Hopefully the next 3 to 6 months is a wild and enjoyable ride of Bitcoin upside. The only downside is all the stupid stuff. XRP and every stupid coin will also get dragged up with Bitcoin. So we're going to have to put up with all these idiots who think they found the next Bitcoin by some stupid coin that's idiot, sort of attracts idiots. So that's the only downside of like a huge parabolic rise in the price of Bitcoin, is you get all these idiots that suddenly feel like they found the next Bitcoin because a rising tide floats all boats. And in the case of Bitcoin, when the largest cryptocurrency goes up, the tide tends to float a lot of other boats, including a bunch of stupid stuff that has no value. And so you got to put up with a bunch of idiots who felt like they found the next big thing. But inevitably, all that stuff ends up going to zero, and then all the people be quiet. But that is one downside of a bull market, is stupid stuff starts to go up too, and then you got to deal with people who think they found the next big thing and don't realize they're getting scammed, especially with stuff like XRP, which is just so blatantly, ridiculously a scam that, it's annoying that people get scammed. But anyway, it should be a super fun next 3 to 6 months. Stay safe out there, pay attention, and buy your Bitcoin before a huge parabolic rise, because it's a lot more painful if you wait and you're stuck buying your Bitcoin at a lot higher prices.